Settle yourself into a comfortable position. Let the day's worries fade to the edges of your mind. We are about to take a long, quiet journey into the past. A past that moved to a very different rhythm than our own. Tonight, we begin in a medieval European city. Not the romanticized version with colorful market stalls and brave knights, but the real, lived-in place, its smells, its sounds, its relentless press of humanity. A place where survival often depended on luck, resourcefulness, and the kindness, or at least the tolerance, of neighbors who may not have bathed for weeks. As we wander together through these streets, you may notice the way the air feels close, heavy with wood smoke and the faint scent of damp stone. The sound of distant church bells drifts between the alleys, marking the hours. Somewhere nearby, a cartwheel creaks over uneven cobblestones. We will spend our time here slowly exploring not just the daily life of ordinary people, but also the lives of remarkable individuals, the mysteries buried in the earth, and the quiet opulence of those who lived in privilege. But first, let us begin at street level, where your day in the medieval city is about to begin. Imagine that you are waking in the half-light before dawn. The room around you is small, with walls of wattle and daub-woven sticks packed with clay. Your mattress is little more than a sack stuffed with straw. It rustles faintly as you shift your weight, and you feel the coolness of the morning air seeping in through the gaps in the walls. There is no glass in the window, only a wooden shutter that was closed against the night's chill. You open it now, and the first sounds of the city greet you. The low murmur of voices from the street, the distant clang of a blacksmith's hammer, and the cooing of pigeons that roost in the eaves of the building opposite. The air carries a mingling of scents. There is the faint sweetness of baking bread from a baker's oven nearby, but also the sharper smell of refuse chamber pots emptied into the gutters overnight, mingling with the runoff from yesterday's rain. The streets here are narrow, sometimes no more than the width of 2 carts, and the tall buildings seem to lean in toward one another, their upper stories nearly touching in places. You step out onto the street. The ground beneath your feet is uneven, a patchwork of cobblestones, dirt, and puddles that have not yet dried. A man pushes past you, balancing a basket of fish on his shoulder. The fish were brought in before dawn from the river, their silvery scales still glistening faintly in the dim light. The smell is strong, but no one here minds it is the smell of a meal to come. You walk on, past a woman drawing water from a public well. She moves carefully, for the rope is frayed, and dropping the bucket would mean a long, awkward retrieval. Clean water is precious here. Though the city has wells, and perhaps an aqueduct, the water can still be contaminated by waste from nearby homes or workshops. Boiling it is safer, but fuel for the fire is costly. As the sun rises higher, the streets grow busier. Merchants set up their stalls, calling out their goods in voices trained to carry above the crowd. Woolen cloth from the weaver's quarter, salt from the coast, onions and leeks from the countryside. Children weave between the adults, their bare feet nimble on the rough ground. A dog noses through a pile of discarded vegetable trimmings. You pause near a crossroads, where the sounds of the city gather and swell. There is the rhythmic beat of a carpenter's mallet, the laughter of 2 women exchanging gossip, and the occasional sharp shout as a cart driver warns pedestrians out of the way. Over it all, the church bell tolls the hour. It will ring again and again through the day, a constant reminder of time's slow passage. But life here is not without danger. A stray spark from a hearth could ignite a fire that leaps from roof to roof in minutes. Illness spreads quickly in the close quarters, carried on the breath, in the water, or by the ever-present rats. And always, there is the press of people, in the marketplace, in the alleys, even in your own home, where privacy is a luxury few can afford. By the time the sun is high, you are weary from the jostling, the noise, and the constant negotiation of narrow streets. You notice the way your clothes cling to your skin, damp from the mingled warmth of bodies and the occasional misting rain. It is a place alive with movement, but one that asks much of you: your strength, your endurance, your ability to adapt to a life where every resource must be earned, bartered, or shared. And so, before the day is done, you understand. Life in the medieval city is a balance between survival and community, between scarcity and resourcefulness. For the people who call it home, it is simply life. For you, it would be an endurance you might not last beyond the day. From the bustle of the marketplace, let us drift away from the press of the crowd and the clamor of daily trade. Our path now leads us into the countryside of France, in the early 15th century. The air here is quieter, scented with tilled earth and wood smoke. It is here, in a small village, called that a girl named Jean was born. We know her better now as Joan of Arc. Joan's world began simply. Her family worked the land, keeping cattle and tending fields. The seasons dictated the pace of life, the planting, the harvesting, the long winters when the hearth became the center of the home. As a child, Joan would have known the creak of the water wheel by the mill, the sound of church bells calling the faithful, and the rustle of wind in the tall grasses. But France, in Joan's time, was not at peace. The 100 Years' War between France and England had already stretched on for decades. Armies moved across the countryside, sometimes plundering, sometimes demanding loyalty. Villagers alike were not spared the anxiety that such a war brought. News traveled slowly, carried by travelers and priests, but its weight was felt everywhere. Joan was still a teenager when she began to speak of visions. She said she heard voices saints who instructed her to support the Dauphin, the rightful heir to the French throne, and to help drive the English from France. In another age, such a claim might have been dismissed or feared, but in the turmoil of the war, and with a people hungry for hope, Joan's conviction drew attention. She left her village, dressed in simple clothing, and traveled to speak with the Dauphin. This journey was no small undertaking for a young woman of her time. The roads were uncertain, the weather unpredictable, and the politics more dangerous than either. Yet she reached him, and somehow, perhaps through her words, perhaps through her calm certainty, she convinced him to give her a role in the fight for France. Imagine her now, a figure clad in armor, still small of frame, still young in years, yet leading soldiers into battle. Her presence inspired them, not only because of her courage, but because she represented a vision of divine favor. To her followers, she was proof that God had not abandoned France, but the path she walked was as perilous as it was extraordinary. Captured during a skirmish, she was sold to the English. Her trial was long and complex, a tangle of politics, religion, and fear. The judges questioned her not only about her visions, but also about her manner of dress, her defiance of expected roles, and her loyalty to her cause. Throughout it all, she remained composed, answering with clarity, sometimes with quiet wit. Yet the outcome was already decided. The sentence was carried out in the city of Rouen in the year 1431. She was just 19 years old. Centuries later, Joan of Arc would be canonized as a saint, her name remembered far beyond the borders of her home. In life, she was a peasant girl who believed she had a mission. In death, she became a symbol of resilience and faith, her story woven into the long tapestry of France's history. From the village fields of her youth to the courts and battlefields that defined her brief life, Joan's journey was one of extraordinary courage, but also of profound sacrifice. Let us leave the cobbled streets and war-torn landscapes behind for a moment and step into a quieter place. The year is 1939, and we are in the gentle countryside of Suffolk, England. The air is soft here, carrying the faint scent of cut grass and wildflowers. Rolling fields stretch toward the horizon, punctuated by clusters of trees, and there, on a low rise above the River Deben, lies a series of grassy mounds, each one shaped by human hands long ago. This place is called Sutton Hoo. For centuries, the mounds stood quietly, their purpose half forgotten, their contents a mystery. They were part of the landscape, as familiar to local farmers as the changing of the seasons. But in that summer before the Second World War, a decision was made to dig. The landowner, Edith Pretty, had long wondered about these mounds, and she hired an excavator named Basil Brown to see what lay beneath. What they found was not a mere burial, but a treasure of history. One mound, larger than the rest, revealed the impression of a great ship. The wood had long since decayed, but the dark outline in the soil showed where it had lain, its shape stretching nearly 90 feet from bow to stern. At its center, a burial chamber. Inside, the remains of the person who had been laid to rest were gone, claimed by the centuries, but the grave goods remained silent witnesses to the status and wealth of the one they accompanied. There was a great iron helmet, decorated with intricate designs, its crest shaped like a dragon. There were weapons, a sword with a jeweled hilt, a shield, spears, and there were treasures of gold and garnet, silver bowls, and finely worked ornaments. Each object spoke of craftsmanship and of far-reaching connections. The garnets likely came from as far away as India or Sri Lanka. The silver may have traveled from Byzantium. This was a burial not only of a leader, but but of someone whose reach or whose influence spanned a world much larger than their own kingdom. Even now, the identity of the one buried here is uncertain. Some believe it was King Ridwald of East Anglia, a ruler from the early 7th century. Others suggest a different nobleman of similar stature. Without human remains to study, the mystery remains unsolved. Standing here today, looking at the reconstructed treasures in a museum, it is easy to forget how they lay for more than 1,000 years beneath the earth undisturbed, waiting for the right hands to reveal them. And it is easy to imagine the day they were placed in the ground, the ship drawn up from the river, the mourners gathered, the rich goods carefully arranged, and the mound of earth raised high to guard the memory of the departed. Sutton, who remains a bridge between the known and the unknown, a quiet reminder that history still keeps many of its secrets. Some are buried deep, under layers of earth and grass. Others are hidden in plain sight, waiting for us to look more closely. From the grassy mounds of Sutton Hoo, let us travel forward in time and step into the shadow of a towering stone keep. The air here is cooler, shaded by high walls and narrow windows. Before you lies a drawbridge, stretched over a deep, still moat. The water reflects the sky in muted tones, disturbed only by the occasional ripple of a passing duck. Crossing into the castle, the world changes. The sounds of the town fade behind you. Inside the walls, there is a kind of hush, broken only by the footsteps of servants and the muffled clang of a blacksmith working in the inner yard. The smell shifts too from the smoke of city hearths to the faint aroma of rushes and herbs spread across the floors. Meant to keep the air fresh, you enter the great hall, the heart of the castle. The room is vast, its high timber-bird roof arching above like the hull of an inverted ship. A long table runs down the center, its surface polished from years of use. Light spills in through narrow windows, falling across tapestries that hang from the stone walls. They are more than decoration. Each one is a story, woven in wool, a record of battles won, hunts enjoyed, or alliances made. The lord of the castle sits at the high table, raised slightly above the rest. His seat is flanked by trusted advisors, family members, and honored guests. Meals here are as much about politics as they are about nourishment. A subtle nod, a shared cup, a place offered at the table each carries meaning. The food arrives in slow procession. Trenchers of bread piled with roasted meats, bowls of thick stew, plates of soft cheese, and pitchers of wine. The scents mingle herbs from the kitchen garden, the richness of cooked meat, the temps of freshly poured ale. Servants move quietly among the diners, refilling cups and clearing away platters. After the meal, the hall quiets. Some drift to the warmth of the fire, where the crackle of logs fills the air. Others step outside into the inner courtyard, where the sunlight slants across the stone and the flutter of pennants breaks the stillness. The Lord might hold court here, hearing petitions from those who seek his favor or judgment. In these moments, the castle is not only a home, but the center of governance, a place where decisions ripple outward into the lives of many. Beyond the hall, smaller chambers branch off private rooms with heavy wooden doors, storerooms filled with salted meats and sacks of grain, and narrow staircases spiraling upward to the battlements. From there, you can see far across the surrounding lands, green fields, winding rivers, and the distant cluster of a village. The walls here are thick, meant to keep the world out, or to hold it at bay when trouble comes. At night, the castle changes again. The great hall falls silent, lit only by the glow of a few torches. The sounds of the day fade into the soft hoot of an owl beyond the walls. You can feel the weight of the stone around you, the sense of being enclosed, protected, and perhaps a little removed from the life beyond the gates. Inside a lord's castle, life is measured and deliberate. It is a place of both security and responsibility, where every action, every feast, every meeting, every word shapes the fabric of life within and beyond its walls. The sun has only just begun to rise over the horizon, and already the day is warm. A pale golden light spills across the desert beyond the fields, and the long ribbon of the Nile glimmers faintly in the distance. You wake on a low mat in a small mud-brick house. Its walls are cool now, but they will grow hot as the day advances. A woven reed mat covers the doorway, shifting gently with the faint morning breeze. The first sounds you hear are the voices of neighbors calling to one another, the bray of a donkey being led toward the fields, and the splash of water poured into jars. There is no rush here, but there is no idleness. Either each day has its work, and that work begins early. Stepping outside, you see the ground is dry and dusty, but the air still holds the freshness of night. The houses clustered close together, their walls painted with lime wash to reflect the sun. Smoke rises from small outdoor hearths as women begin to grind grain for bread. They work with large stone querns, leaning forward, their hands moving in a slow, steady rhythm that has not changed for generations. The Nile is the lifeline of this place. When its waters rise during the inundation season, they spill over the banks, soaking the soil and leaving behind a rich layer of silt. For months afterward, the land is fertile, and crops can grow with little more than careful tending. But the river is not entirely predictable. A year of low floods means meager harvests. A year of high floods may sweep away homes near its banks. The people here live with the river's gifts and its whims. In the fields, farmers bend over rows of barley and emmer wheat. They work with wooden plows drawn by oxen, the animals moving slowly in the morning heat. Others stand knee-deep in irrigation channels, guiding water toward the crops. The sun climbs higher, and the light grows brighter, reflecting from the water's surface in a shimmer that makes you narrow your eyes. Nearby, children carry baskets of onions and leeks from the vegetable plots. They chatter quietly, pausing to drink from water jars, the clay cool against their hands. Artisans in the village hammer copper into tools, carve wood into furniture, or shape clay on spinning wheels. Each task is part of a greater whole, the slow weaving of a community's survival. When the midday heat becomes heavy, people retreat to the shade. Meals are simple: flatbread, fresh vegetables, perhaps fish from the river. You hear the gentle hum of conversation, the soft laughter of neighbors, and the rustle of palm fronds in the warm breeze. There is work still to do before evening, but for now, the heat makes movement languid and unhurried. As the day fades, the air cools again. The scent of the river mingles with that of cooking fires. Some sit outside their homes, repairing nets, telling stories, or simply watching the last light slip beyond the desert. In the distance, the dark shape of a temple rises against the sky, its presence a reminder that life here is not only about the body's needs, but also the spirit's. For the people of ancient Egypt, this rhythm work, rest, community, worship was the steady heartbeat of life. It was not an easy life, but it was a familiar one. Every day was shaped by the river, the sun, and the knowledge that tomorrow would follow the same measured path. From the quiet hum of the village, let us drift upward into the realm of kings and temples, where decisions are etched not in mud and reeds, but in stone and in the memory of a nation. The story of Akhenaten begins like that of other pharaohs. Born into the royal household of Egypt's 18th dynasty, he inherited a kingdom of wealth, tradition, and deeply rooted religion. The gods of Egypt were many: Amun, Osiris, Isis, Hathor, each with temples, rituals, and a priesthood that served as both spiritual and political power. For generations, this structure had been the foundation of life. Yet Akhenaten, when he came to power, began to move against it. His vision was singular: the worship of one god above all others, the attender visible disk of the sun. He did not deny the sun's power. Indeed, the daily rising of the sun over the Nile had long been a symbol of renewal and order. But Akhenaten sought to make this devotion exclusive, a shift that unsettled the foundations of Egyptian religion. Imagine the court in these years. Priests accustomed to centuries of tradition found themselves without their former influence. Temples to other gods were closed or abandoned, their offerings redirected to the Aten. Artists, too, began to work in new ways. The stiff, formal poses of earlier centuries gave way to softer, more natural scenes. Images of Akhenaten and his queen, Nefertiti, shone with their daughters beneath the outstretched rays of the sun. The changes were not only in art and ritual, but in place. Akhenaten ordered the construction of a new capital city, Akhetaten, the horizon of the Aten. It rose from the desert in a place where no settlement had stood before. Broad avenues, open courtyards, and temples without roofs welcomed the sunlight directly onto the altars. Life there revolved around the king's vision, the city itself a living monument to his faith. For those who lived in Akhetaten, daily life must have felt both familiar and altered. The river still flowed, the fields still yielded grain, but the festivals, the prayers, and the symbols were different. Where once there had been many deities to honor, now the Aten's rays reached into every ceremony. But such sweeping change was fragile. After Akhenaten's death, the old gods returned, His city was abandoned, its walls left to crumble in the desert wind. His name, in some records, was erased, a deliberate act to remove him from memory. The priests of Ammon regained their temples and their influence, and the rhythms of religion returned to the patterns that had endured for centuries. Today, Akhenaten's reign is a puzzle. Some see him as a visionary, introducing the idea of a single divine power. Others view him as a ruler whose focus on religion weakened Egypt's stability. What is certain is that his time on the throne left an imprint faint in the sand, yet still visible to those who look closely. As the sun sets over the Nile, it is easy to picture him standing in one of his open courtyards, his face turned upward, eyes half closed in the golden light. For him, the Aten was not only the source of life, but the center of the world. The Nile fades into the distance, now its green banks narrowing as we follow a winding path westward, away from the fertile floodplains, into the dry embrace of the desert. The air here is sharper, drier, touched with the scent of warm stone. Ahead, pale limestone cliffs rise like ancient sentinels, their surfaces weathered by wind and sun. This is the Valley of the Kings. For centuries, it served as the final resting place for Egypt's pharaohs and high nobles. Here, they built their tombs deep into the rock, hidden from view, protected at least in theory from the plunder of grave robbers. Each tomb was a house for eternity, stocked with all the goods a king might need in the afterlife: furniture, clothing, jewelry, and offerings of food and drink. Step quietly into one of these tombs, and the light dims around you. The air is still, cool, despite the heat outside. The walls glow faintly in the flicker of a torch, their surfaces covered with painted scenes, gods and goddesses, spells from the Book of the Dead, and images of the king himself, making his journey into the next world. The colors, though faded, still carry warmth: deep ochres, soft blues, the gleam of gold leaf. Yet for all their beauty, many of these tombs did not remain sealed. Over the centuries, robbers broke into them, taking what they could. Sometimes this happened only years after the burial, sometimes centuries later. Even in the quiet of the desert, human hands reached in to disturb what was meant to last forever. Still, the valley kept some of its secrets. In 1922, Howard Carter uncovered the tomb of Tutankhamun, small compared to others, yet nearly intact. The discovery made headlines around the world, but beyond the gold and the treasures, it told a more subtle story, that even a young king, nearly forgotten by history, could endure in the memory of stone and sand. And even now, the valley has not given up all it holds. Archaeologists continue to work here, their tents dotting the dusty ground, their tools carefully brushing away centuries of sediment. Some search for tombs mentioned in ancient records, but never found. Others study the already opened chambers, piecing together fragments of art, inscriptions, and objects to better understand the world of the dead and, through it, the world of the living. In the stillness of the valley, you can almost imagine the processions that once wound their way here, priests chanting softly, incense curling into the air, the desert wind carrying the scent of myrrh. Behind them, the king's body, wrapped in linen, traveling toward its eternal home. The Valley of the Kings is both a place of endings and of endurance. The kings who rest here may have been robbed of their treasures, their names worn away by time, yet their presence lingers in every carved wall and hidden chamber. The desert, patient and watchful, continues to guard their secrets that may wait another 1,000 years before revealing themselves. The desert hills fade behind us, and once again the Nile's green ribbon appears broad and gleaming under the afternoon sun. We follow its curve until the land begins to rise, and there, set apart from the bustle of towns and fields, the palace comes into view. Its walls are high, smooth, and pale, catching the light so that they seem to shimmer against the blue sky. A broad avenue leads toward the gates, lined with statues of lions and sphinxes. The air is touched with the scent of lotus blossoms from nearby pools, and somewhere within, the faint trace of incense drifts on the breeze. Stepping inside, you enter a series of courtyards. The stone beneath your feet is warm, and the sounds are softer here: the low murmur of servants speaking, the rhythmic splash of a fountain, the rustle of palm leaves stirred by the wind. This is the pharaoh's domain, a place where beauty and power are woven seamlessly together. In the grand audience hall, tall columns rise like a forest of stone, their surfaces painted with images of gods, papyrus reeds, and lotus flowers. Light filters down from high windows, catching on gold inlays and polished alabaster. Here, The pharaoh holds court, seated on a throne that gleams with electrum and gemstones. The seat itself carved with scenes of triumph and divine blessing. Around him stand courtiers, scribes, and officials. Each movement is measured, each word chosen carefully, for the palace is not merely a home, it is the heart of government. Decisions made here ripple outward across Egypt, touching the lives of farmers in distant fields and merchants in far-off towns. Beyond the public halls lie the private chambers. Here, the air is cooler, scented with cedar chests and jars of perfumed oil. The floors are covered with woven mats, and the walls painted with scenes of gardens, hunting, and feasting. In shaded courtyards, pools are edged with lilies, and fruit trees bend under the weight of ripening figs and dates. The rhythm of the palace day is one of ritual as much as routine. Priests arrive to conduct ceremonies in the palace shrine, offering incense and food to the gods, seeking their favor for the ruler and the land. Musicians play softly during meals, their harps and flutes blending with the quiet murmur of conversation. Attendants bring trays of bread, roasted meats, honey cakes, and wine sweetened with dates. Even leisure here is touched by ceremony. Hunting in the palace gardens is more than sport, it is a symbol of control over nature. Banquets are not simply meals, they are displays of generosity, alliances sealed in the sharing of food. As the day draws to a close, the light in the palace shifts. Golden sunlight streams through carved screens, casting patterned shadows across the walls. Servants light oil lamps, their flames steady in the still air. The scent of frankincense deepens as night falls, and the sounds of the outer city fade to a distant hum. The pharaoh retires to his private rooms, where the air is cool and the ceiling painted with stars. Beyond the palace walls, the Nile continues its eternal flow, and the city sleeps. Inside, the hush of the night settles over the courtyards and halls, as steady and unbroken as the rhythm of life itself. The sun is barely over the rooftops, and already the air in the training yard is warm, its dryness carrying the faint scent of sand, sweat, and old wood. This is the Ludus, the Gladiator school. Its high walls block the view of the streets outside, sealing the men here into a world of routine and discipline. You wake on a narrow wooden bed in a small cell. The light filters through a barred opening high in the wall, catching on the rough plaster and the clay water jar in the corner. The room is sparsely furnished, just enough space for sleeping and storing a few personal belongings. There is no privacy, only the low murmur of other men waking in the cells nearby, the shuffle of feet on the worn stone floor. The day begins with food, but not the feasts that Romans are famous for. A bowl of barley porridge, perhaps a few figs or olives. It is filling rather than fine, chosen to build strength and endurance. Meat is rare, saved for special occasions or for those in training for an important match. After eating, you step into the yard. Here, wooden posts stand in neat rows, scarred from countless strikes of wooden swords. Trainers, often retired gladiators themselves, pace the grounds, watching with sharp eyes as men practice their moves. The training is relentless, lunging, blocking, stepping forward, stepping back, over and over, until the body responds without thought. Weapons are heavy in this early stage. The swords are weighted, the shields thick and unwieldy, forcing the muscles to strengthen beyond what will be needed in the arena. The air fills with the steady rhythm of impact, wood on wood. The dull thud of shield meeting shield, the occasional grunt of effort. Between drills, the men spar with each other. These are not true battles, but they are not gentle either. Every bruise is a reminder of the fine line between victory and injury. Medical care exists, but it is basic, more concerned with getting a fighter back into shape quickly than with long-term healing. The afternoon is no easier. More drills, more practice, and sometimes a demonstration for visiting patrons. The patrons, wealthy citizens or officials, may decide to sponsor a fighter, covering his expenses in exchange for the prestige of supporting a champion. To be chosen means better equipment, perhaps better food, but it also means higher expectations in the arena. As evening falls, the yard grows quieter. The men return to their cells, some talking softly, others sitting in silence. You can hear the muffled sounds of the city beyond the walls, the rumble of carts, the calls of vendors, and the distant splash of a fountain. But here, inside the Ludus, the night belongs to rest, and to the thoughts of what tomorrow might bring. For the life of a gladiator is a constant balance between preparation and exhaustion, between hope and the knowledge that any match could be the last. It is a life lived within walls, measured not in years, but in bouts survived. We leave behind the training yards of the gladiators, their shouts and the steady thud of practice swords fading into the distance. Our path now leads us into the marble heart of Rome itself, where politics and ambition move with a quiet but unstoppable force. Julius Caesar's story begins in the year 100 BC. He was born into an old patrician family, one with a proud lineage but not great wealth. Rome at the time was a republic, its politics shaped by the Senate, and by the complex interplay between those seeking to preserve tradition and those eager to reshape the state for their own ends. From an early age, Caesar learned the art of navigating this world. He studied rhetoric and law, training his voice to carry in the Senate's open halls, his mind to remember the shifting alliances that could make or break a career. Yet his life was not confined to words alone. He also served in the military, earning distinction in distant campaigns. It was in Gaul, during years of hard campaigning, that Caesar truly rose to prominence. His legions marched through forests and across rivers, building roads and fortifications as they went. Reports of his victories traveled back to Rome, each one adding to his reputation as a commander of rare skill and determination. But fame on the battlefield often brings tension in the Senate. Some saw Caesar as a hero, others feared the power he was gathering. When his term as governor of Gaul ended, the Senate ordered him to disband his army before returning to Rome. Instead, in 49 BCE, he led his troops across the Rubicon River, a direct challenge to the Senate's authority. It was a step that made civil war inevitable. The conflict was swift and decisive. Caesar emerged as Rome's leader, named dictator, a position he claimed he would hold only briefly. In this role, he began reforms, adjusting the calendar, revising laws, and granting citizenship to people beyond the Italian peninsula. For some, these changes were welcome. For others, they signaled that the Republic was slipping into one man's hands. In the year 44 BCE, the Senate prepared to meet in the theater of Pompey. On the Ides of March, a group of senators approached Caesar there, believing they were defending the Republic. Their blades ended his life in an instant, but also set in motion the end of the very Republic they claimed to protect. In the days that followed, Rome was unsettled, its streets filled with both grief and uncertainty. Caesar's name would not fade. It became a symbol for ambition, for reform, for the fine line between power that serves and power that consumes. Standing in the Forum today, where fragments of marble and column bases mark the places where he once walked, you can almost hear the quiet rustle of togas, the low murmur of debate, and the echo of decisions that shaped not only a city, but the course of history itself. From the marble grandeur of Rome, we travel southward toward the Bay of Naples. The air here is softer, touched with the scent of the sea, and the distant line of mountains rises gently against the horizon. Among them is one peak that seems calm enough, its slopes green with vineyards and dotted with farms. Mount Vesuvius. At its base lies the city of Pompeii. In the year 79 CE, it was a thriving place, its streets lined with shops, its courtyards shaded by fig trees, its houses painted with vivid murals. The sound of footsteps on stone pavements, the chatter of merchants calling out their wares, and the trickle of fountains in small squares walled, have been part of the daily rhythm. That morning began as countless others had. Bakers worked at their ovens, filling the air with the warm scent of bread. Farmers brought baskets of produce into the market. Children played in the open courtyards, their laughter carrying between the walls. But before long, a faint rumble could be heard from the direction of Vesuvius. It was not entirely unusual. Earth tremors had shaken the region before. Life continued, though some must have paused to glance toward the mountain, its summit just visible above the rooftops. By midday, a dark column had begun to rise from the peak, spreading outward like a vast pine tree of ash and smoke. As the hours passed, the light dimmed, and fine ash began to drift down onto the city. The streets grew quieter, as people hurried to secure their homes or make their way toward the gates. In the hours that followed, the ash thickened, layer upon layer settling over rooftops and courtyards. Some sought shelter indoors, others fled along the roads that led away from the city. Then came the surge's fast-moving waves of hot gas and ash sweeping down the mountain slopes. They moved silently at first, then with a force that left nothing untouched. When the eruption ended, Pompeii lay buried. Its streets, homes, and markets disappeared beneath several meters of ash and pumice. Centuries would pass before it was uncovered again. When archaeologists began to dig here in the 18th century, they found something remarkable. The city was preserved much as it had been on that final day. Paintings still clung to the walls, loaves of bread remained in ovens, and the shapes of people and animals were captured in the hardened ash. Today, walking through Pompeii's excavated streets, you can see the wheel ruts worn into the stones, the stepping stones placed to keep feet dry during heavy rains, and the open courtyards where vines still grow. It is a place where time seems to pause not in silence, but in the faint echo of voices, the imagined footsteps of a city forever caught in its last moments. From the ash-covered streets of Pompeii, let us drift into the airy courtyards of a very different Roman world. Here, the walls are high but open to the sky, the floors patterned with intricate mosaics, and the scent of fresh flowers drifts in from carefully tended gardens. This is the domain of the Roman elite senators, wealthy merchants, and high-ranking officials. Their homes, called domus, are arranged with deliberate elegance. You step first into the atrium, a broad reception hall with a shallow pool at its center, catching rainwater from an opening in the roof above. Sunlight filters in through this square of open sky, reflecting on polished marble floors. Beyond the atrium lies the peristyle, a garden courtyard enclosed by colonnades. Here, the air is cooler, shaded by columns, and softened by the sound of fountains. Shrubs are trimmed into neat shapes, and small statues of gods and heroes stand among the greenery. Life here moves at a slower pace than in the crowded streets outside. Breakfast is light bread, fruit, perhaps cheese taken in a shaded corner of the garden. The day might begin with meetings in the study, where scrolls of law and correspondence are stacked neatly in niches, or with a visit to the baths, where social and political conversations mix icily with the rituals of washing and relaxation. In the afternoon, guests may arrive for a meal in the triclinium, the dining room named for its 3 couches arranged around a central table. Here, diners recline on cushions, servants bring platters of roasted meats, fresh seafood, and delicate pastries drizzled with honey. Wine is poured, often mixed with water and flavored with herbs. These meals are not merely for sustenance, they are opportunities to strengthen alliances, to share news, and to display wealth and refinement. Musicians may play softly in the background, their notes blending with the gentle trickle of water from the courtyard fountains. Beyond the public spaces, the private rooms of the villa are quieter. Here, walls may be painted with scenes of landscapes or mythological tales. Beds are draped with fine textiles, and chests hold carefully folded garments of linen and wool. Yet, even in this luxury, life in Rome's elite circles is shaped by subtle competition. Political influence is carefully guarded. Friendships can shift with the fortunes of the Senate, and a misplaced word at a banquet might ripple outward into unexpected consequences. As evening falls, lamps are lit, casting a warm, steady glow on the marble and painted walls. The gardens are fragrant with night-blooming flowers, and the household grows quiet. Outside the villa gates, the hum of the city continues, but within, the night settles softly, as steady and unbroken as the stone columns that have stood here for generations. The light here is pale and thin, filtered through a narrow gap between rows of buildings that lean toward each other. The street beneath your feet is uneven, a patchwork of cobblestones and dirt, slick from last night's rain. Puddles reflect a dim grey sky, broken now and again by the passing shadow of a cart or a hurried step. The air carries the smell of coal smoke from chimneys above, mixed with the dampness that clings to brick and timber. Somewhere nearby, the low hum of voices blends with the distant clang of a factory bell. It is the sound that draws many from their beds, for work begins early and ends late. Inside the tenements, space is scarce. A single room might hold a family of 6, its walls stained with damp, its small hearth burning only when there is fuel to spare. Clothes hang from ropes strung overhead, drying slowly in the cool air. The floorboards creak beneath bare feet. Breakfast, if it comes, is simple. Bread that may already be going stale. Tea brewed strong to mask the taste of the water. Food must be bought daily, for there is no space to store much, and little money to buy more than is needed at once. Stepping outside, you join a slow-moving stream of people headed toward the mills, the docks, or the factories that fill the air with constant noise. The streets are crowded even at this early hour. Women carry baskets, men push handcarts loaded with coal or cloth, and children weave between them, some carrying messages or bundles of work to be finished at home. The workday is long. Inside the factories, the air is warm and close, thick with the fine dust of cotton or the metallic scent of machinery. The sound is constant: gears turning, belts moving, the sharp hiss of steam. Hands move quickly, for pay often depends on the number of pieces completed in a day. By the time the light begins to fade, the streets grow busier again as workers return home. Shops glow faintly in the dusk, their windows crowded with goods, candles, soap, bread, and the occasional treat. The smell of cooking drifts from open doors, and the sound of voices rises as families gather. In the evenings, the rooms are lit by oil lamps or by the fire, if there is coal enough to burn. Some mend clothes, some talk quietly, and others simply rest after the day's labor. Outside, the streets echo with the rumble of carts and the distant whistle of trains passing through the city. Life here is a constant balancing act between earnings and expenses, between illness and health, between hope for something better and the demands of the present day. For those who live in the slums, survival is not a given, it is the work of every single day. From the narrow lanes of the slum, let us walk toward quieter streets where the houses are taller, the windows clearer, and the air a little cleaner. It is here, in a different corner of Victorian Britain, that a young woman begins a journey that will carry her far beyond the world she knew. Florence Nightingale was born in 1820 into a family of comfortable means. Her childhood was marked by education and travel, by books and discussions that shaped her mind. In a time when many women of her class were expected to marry well and manage a household, Florence felt drawn to a different path. From an early age, she spoke of a Kalinga quiet, persistent sense that her life should be devoted to the care of others. Nursing, however, was not considered a suitable occupation for someone of her background. Hospitals were often seen as grim, even dangerous places, and those who worked there were viewed with suspicion. Yet Florence's determination did not fade. She trained first in Germany, learning not only practical skills but also the importance of cleanliness, organization, and calm in the midst of illness. When the Crimean War broke out in 1853, reports reached Britain of the terrible conditions in the military hospitals: overcrowded wards, poor sanitation, shortages of basic supplies. Florence was asked to lead a group of nurses to care for the wounded. The journey to the Crimea was long, and when she arrived, the situation was even worse than she had been told. The smell of illness and infection lingered in the air. Water was scarce, and the wards were dimly lit. Her work began not only at the bedside, but in cleaning, organizing, and securing the resources needed to make true healing possible. Florence's approach was methodical. She kept careful records of supplies and of patient outcomes, using numbers to show what changes could save lives. She walked the wards at night with a lamp in hand, her quiet presence bringing comfort to those who could not sleep. It was in those hours that she became known as the Lady with the Lamp. By the time she returned to Britain, her reputation had grown. She used her influence to push for reforms in hospitals, not only for soldiers but for civilians as well. Clean water, proper ventilation, trained staff, these became her lasting contributions, woven into the fabric of modern nursing. Florence Nightingale lived to see the profession she loved earn respect. She spent her later years writing, advising, and ensuring that her work would continue. Her life, though far removed from the slums we first walked through, still touched them, for better hospitals and better care meant a greater chance of survival for all, regardless of where they were born. We return now to the East End of London, two streets where the air feels heavier at night, thick with coal smoke, dampness, and the faint scent of the river. The cobblestones glisten in the glow of the gas lamps, their light softened by a low-hanging fog that curls between buildings. It is the late 1880s, and the East End is a place of constant movement: market stalls by day, crowded pubs in the evening, and shadowed alleys where the hum of voices grows faint. In these narrow streets, a series of events would unfold that would grip the city's attention and leave behind a mystery that lingers even now. The name given by newspapers was Jack the Ripper. The identity of the person behind that name has never been confirmed. The crimes attributed to him took place over a brief span of months, yet their impact was lasting, spreading fear among those who lived in the poorest districts of London. At the time, the police worked by lamplight and paper records. Communication was slow, and the narrow, twisting streets made it easy for someone to disappear into the night. Witness accounts were often uncertain, memories shifting with each retelling. Despite the number of officers assigned to the case, the trail seemed to vanish as quickly as it was found. The newspapers of the day printed every rumor, filling their pages with speculation and imagined details. Some letters arrived at police stations, written in a hand claiming to be the killer's own, though whether these were genuine or the work of those seeking attention is still debated. For the people who lived in the East End, the fear was tangible. Women walking home alone kept to the better-lit streets. Neighbors looked out for one another. Doors were bolted earlier in the evening, and conversations often turned to the question of when, or if, the killer would be caught. More than a century later, historians and researchers continue to sift through the evidence, police reports, witness statements, and the fading photographs of the time. The theories are many, pointing to suspects from all walks of life: doctor, a sailor, a tradesman, even members of the upper class. But each theory meets with doubt, and the true name behind Jack the Ripper remains a shadow in history. Walking these same streets today, the fog still gathers in the corners, and the quiet between the gas lamps feels much as it must have then. The mystery persists, not because it cannot be solved, but because it has become a part of the city's story, woven into the fabric of its past. An unanswered question lingering in the night air. We leave behind the dim, narrow streets of the East End, and the air changes almost at once. The smell of coal smoke is still present, but here it mingles with the scent of manicured gardens, freshly cut grass, and polished wood. The streets are wider, lined with tall trees whose branches sway gently above neat brick walls. Beyond one such wall, a wrought-iron gate stands open to a gravel drive. The sound of footsteps here is softened by the stones underfoot, and ahead rises the broad facade of a Victorian manor. Its windows reflect the pale afternoon light, and the tall front door is framed by columns and carved stone. Stepping inside, the temperature shifts to a cool, even stillness. The entrance hall is wide, its floor a pattern of dark and light tiles polished to a muted shine. Coats hang neatly on wooden pegs, and an umbrella stand of brass rests in one corner. The air smells faintly of beeswax and lavender, from furniture polish and the sachets tucked discreetly into drawers. From the hall, broad staircases lead upward to the private rooms of the family, while to one side, a doorway opens into the drawing room. Here, the windows are tall and dressed with heavy drapes, their folds catching the light in soft shadows. A fire burns low in the grate, and the quiet tick of a clock marks the slow passing of the hour. The furniture is arranged with precision. Sofas and armchairs upholstered in patterned fabric. Small tables bearing porcelain vases, and framed photographs in silver and wood. Each object is placed not only for function, but to create an impression of refinement and stability. Beyond this, the dining room is prepared for the evening meal. A long table stretches nearly the length of the room, its surface gleaming beneath a polished silver candelabrum. The plates are set with folded napkins, and crystal glasses catch the light in tiny, sharp reflections. Meals here are taken in courses, with conversation paced as carefully as the service. Upstairs, the family's bedrooms are spacious and airy, their windows overlooking the gardens. Wardrobes hold neatly pressed garment stay dresses, and formal wear for the ladies. Tailcoats and waistcoats for the gentlemen. The beds are high, dressed with thick quilts, and the air is scented with the faintest trace of rosewater. Behind the scenes, the manor is kept running by a quiet staff. Servants move along back staircases and through narrow corridors, tending to fires, polishing silver, and ensuring that each meal, each gathering, and each room is ready exactly when it should be. Their work is constant, but it is done with a practiced discretion that keeps them almost unseen. Outside, as evening falls, lamps are lit along the garden paths, casting a soft glow over trimmed hedges and still ponds. From the manor's windows, the warm light spills outward into the gathering dusk, while inside, the hush of the evening settles gently over the rooms. Here, life moves to a slower rhythm measured not by the factory bell, but by the quiet chiming of the mantel clock, and by the steady cycle of meals, guests, and private hours. It is a world apart from the slum, yet it exists in the same city, its calm and order balanced on the unseen labor of many hands. The air is sharp with cold, its edge softened only slightly by the faint light of the early sun. You wake beneath a blanket of wool, in a room with walls of thick turf that slope inward, holding in as much warmth as they can. The ceiling is low, supported by dark wooden beams that still carry the faint scent of smoke from last night's fire. There is no glass in the window, only an oiled cloth stretched tight, letting in a muted light. The floor beneath your feet is packed earth, cool and solid, with scattered rushes to keep the dust down. In the center of the room, the hearth is cold now, but soon it will be coaxed back to life, with a careful breath over embers saved from the night. Breakfast is simple. Barley bread, a little cheese, perhaps dried fish from the last catch before the water froze. Food is eaten quickly. There is too much to do before the day warms, if it ever truly warms at all. Outside, the frost crunches beneath your boots. The land stretches away in low, uneven fields, bounded by stone walls and woven fences. The soil here is stubborn, mixed with rock, and every furrow turned has been earned with sweat. In summer, you might grow barley, rye, or oats, but each year's harvest depends on the weather, and the weather here can turn without warning. Livestock is as important as the fields. Sheep provide wool for clothing and blankets, goats give milk, and a few hardy cattle pull the plow. In winter, keeping them alive means hauling hay from stores, breaking the ice on water troughs, and making sure the wind cannot creep into their shelters. The work is constant. Repairing fences after a storm, mending tools worn from heavy use, splitting wood to feed the hearth. Every task must be done when it is needed. There is no postponing the essentials, for the cold will not wait. And always, there is the knowledge that the farm is not entirely safe. Though most people you know are farmers like yourself, there is always the risk of a raid from across the water. It may never come, but the thought is there, woven into every decision to store more grain, to keep animals close, to keep watch along the shore. As the short day fades, you return to the turf house. The fire is burning now, casting a warm glow on the walls. You eat another simple meal, listening to the wind move across the roof. There is no leisure here beyond what the season allows, only the slow winding down of the day, knowing that tomorrow will ask the same of you again. Life as a Viking farmer is not marked by glory or adventure. It is measured in harvests, in the survival of animals through the winter, in the small successes that mean another year will be seen through. For those who live here, it is simply life. For those unused to it, it would be a trial of endurance from the very first day. From the narrow fields and low turf houses, let us follow the shoreline outward, where the sea meets rock and sky. Here, the air is sharper, carrying the smell of salt and kelp, and the rhythmic sound of waves rolling against stone. It is from these coasts that Leif Erikson began his most remembered journey. Born around the year 970, Leif was the son of Eric the Red, a man whose own voyages had carried him from Norway to Iceland, and then on to Greenland. Leif grew up among people who understood the sea as both opportunity and danger. Its surface a road to distant places, its depths a reminder of the lives it could claim. In his youth, Leif traveled to Norway, where he met King Olaf Tryggvason. There, he was introduced to the Christian faith, and was charged with carrying it back to Greenland. But before that mission could be fully realized, Leif's course would take him farther still into waters no Norse ship had yet sailed. The stories tell that Leif heard of lands to the west, described by sailors, who had been blown off course. Rich forests, milder weather, and game in abundance. It was enough to stir the curiosity of a man raised in the harsher landscapes of the North Atlantic. A crew was gathered, provisions loaded, barrels of water, sacks of grain, preserved fish and meat, and tools for whatever work might be needed on unfamiliar shores. The ship itself was long and narrow, its single sail of wool dyed a deep red-brown, its hull built of overlapping planks, flexible enough to ride the swells without breaking. Setting out from Greenland, they sailed westward into the open sea. The horizon here is endless, and the days pass with the creak of wood, the slap of waves against the hull, and the steady pull of the wind on the sail. At night, the stars are clear and cold above, guiding them as much as the sun by day. They made landfall first in a place they called Helgeland, likely the rocky, barren coasts of what we now know as Baffin Island. From there, they sailed to a forested land they named Markland, before continuing on to a place that seemed almost generous in its offerings. Here, the grass was thick, the waters teemed with fish, and wild grapes grew in sheltered places, leading them to call it Vinland. For a time, they built shelters and explored the surrounding land. The air was softer, the winters less fierce than those of Greenland. Yet the challenges were real: distance from home, uncertainty about the people who might already live nearby, and the difficulty of sustaining a settlement so far from established trade routes. Eventually, Leif returned to Greenland, his ship carrying timber and other goods from Vinland. The settlement did not last, but the journey entered Norse legend, carried forward in the sagas, a reminder that even in an age without compasses or charts as we know them, the will to explore could carry people across an ocean. Standing on the shore today, with the wind pulling at your clothes and the long horizon stretching westward, it is easy to imagine the sight of that ship, its sail low on the water, its bow pointed toward a place known only from rumor, its crew moving steadily into the unknown. From the salt-washed shores of Greenland and Vinland, let us turn inland to a field in what is now southern Norway. The land here is green and rolling, dotted with farms, and in summer the air is sweet with the scent of grass and pine. It was in such a place, over 1,000 years ago, that a ship was drawn from the water for the final time. The vessel was the Oseberg ship, built of oak, its planks overlapping in the clinker style, its prow curving upward in an elegant spiral. It was not merely a tool of travel, it was an object of beauty, its carvings intricate and alive with patterns of animals and curling vines. But this voyage would not be two distant shores. The ship's last journey was across the land, to a burial mound prepared to hold it. Inside, a chamber was built in the center of the hull. Within it, 2 women were laid to rest, their bodies clothed in fine textiles, surrounded by goods that spoke of wealth and high status. There were carved wooden sleighs, buckets bound with brass, textiles dyed in deep reds and blues, and tools for weaving and other crafts. The grave also held the remains of animals, horses, dogs, and oxen, intended, perhaps, to accompany the women in the afterlife. The ship was covered with earth, the mound rising gently over it, and there it lay for centuries, its presence known only as a rounded hill in the field. In 1904, archaeologists began the careful work of excavation. As the soil was removed, the prow of the ship emerged first, its curling shape as striking then as it must have been on the day it was built. Piece by piece, the burial chamber was revealed, and the objects inside were catalogued, their details preserved. The identities of the 2 women remain uncertain. Some believe one was a queen or noblewoman, the other perhaps a companion or priestess. Their burial, with such care and richness, suggests they held great significance in their community. Today, the Oseberg ship rests in a museum, its wood darkened with age, but its form still graceful. The carvings along its sides still catch the light, shadows deepening in their curves, as if the ship itself remembers the journey it once took from sea to land, to the long stillness of the earth. Standing before it, you can almost hear the sound of water along its hull, the creak of its timbers, and the low voices of those who once sailed it. It is a reminder that the Vikings were not only warriors and farmers, but also makers capable of shaping wood into something both strong enough to cross, ocean sand beautiful enough to be worthy of a final voyage. From the quiet mound where the Oseberg ship lay hidden for centuries, let us follow the winding paths inland, to a place where the night is cold but the doors are open, and firelight spills out into the dark. This is the hall of a Viking chieftain. It stands larger than any other building in the settlement, its wooden frame towering above the turf-roofed houses nearby. The walls are made of stout timbers, their surfaces darkened by years of smoke, and the roof slopes steeply to shed snow and rain. Inside, the air is warm, thick with a mingled sense of wood smoke, roasting meat, and freshly baked bread. Along the center of the hall, a long fire burns in a stone-lined trench, its flames steady, its heat spreading outward into the gathered crowd. The smoke drifts upward to the open vent in the roof, where it slips out into the cold night air. Benches line the walls, covered with furs for comfort. Guests sit shoulder to shoulder, their cloaks loosened in the warmth. The firelight flickers across their faces, catching on the glint of brooches and arm rings. Food is carried in on wooden platters, great joints of meat carved into thick slices, bowls of stewed vegetables, and loaves of coarse bread passed from hand to hand. Cups are filled with mead, golden, sweet, and heavy with the scent of honey or ale brewed from barley. The feast is more than a meal. It is an occasion of politics, a way to strengthen bonds between the chieftain and his people. Gifts may be given: finely worked blade, a cloak of dyed wool, a silver arm ring pressed into a palm. Each carries meaning, a reminder of loyalty owed and loyalty rewarded. As the night deepens, the hall fills with the sound of voices. A skald, or poet, stands near the fire, reciting tales of battles fought, of voyages made across stormy seas, and of the deeds of ancestors whose names must not be forgotten. The words rise and fall in a measured rhythm, blending with the crackle of the fire. From time to time, laughter rolls through the hall, or the low hum of agreement greets a well-told story. The chieftain sits at the high seat, listening, watching, his presence both host and center of the gathering. Outside, the wind moves over the darkened fields, but here, within the hall, there is warmth, there is light, and there is the shared understanding that in the long winter months, community is as vital as food or fire. When the embers burned low and the last cups are drained, the guests pull their cloaks around them once more, stepping out into the night. The hall remains behind, its doorway dark, the scent of smoke lingering in the still air. Imagine the year beginning in early spring. The snow has melted from the hillsides, feeding the rivers until they run full and fast. The ground is still cool, but the work begins before the warmth truly returns. You live in a small wooden house with a thatched roof, its walls thin against the wind. The floor is packed earth. At night, the air is cold enough for your breath to hang in pale clouds, and you sleep close to the small hearth at the center of the room. As a peasant in medieval Japan, you are bound to the land you work. The rice you grow will feed not only your family, but also the samurai who own the fields. You pay your taxes in grain off and half of your harvest, leaving only enough to survive until the next planting season. In late spring, the fields are flooded. You wade knee-deep in water, your feet pressing into the soft mud, while you plant each seedling by hand. The air is damp and heavy, and mosquitoes hum in clouds around you. Bent over for hours, your back aches with a slow, constant throb. By summer, the heat becomes oppressive. The air shimmers above the paddies, and sweat runs freely down your neck. You wear a woven hat to shield your eyes from the sun, but your skin darkens and roughens from long days outdoors. Your meals are simple bowls of rice with pickled vegetables or miso soup, and they are taken quickly, before returning to the work that never seems to end. In autumn, the rice turns golden. The harvest is a race against time. 4 storms can sweep in from the sea, flattening the crop before it is brought in. You cut the stalks with a sickle, bundle them, and hang them to dry in the open air. When the tax collectors arrive, there is no negotiation. The portion owed to the Lord is measured out precisely, and if the harvest was poor, you and your family will go hungry. Some years, debts accumulate, and a bad season can mean losing your home, your tools, or even the right to work the land. Winter brings its own challenges. The fields lie dormant, but there is no idleness. You repair tools, patch clothing, and mend the roof against snow. The cold seeps into your bones, and the firewood burns quickly in the small hearth. At all times, you live under the authority of the samurai class. If a samurai passes, you bow low. Any sign of disrespect can lead to punishment, swift and unquestionable. You work quietly, speak politely, and keep your head down. A year in this life is not marked by personal ambition or leisure, but by the turning of the seasons, the demands of the harvest, and the will of those above you. And while it is a life of endurance, it is also one of rhythms, a steady cycle of planting, growing, harvesting, and resting repeated generation after generation. From the quiet, steady life of the peasant, let us step onto another path, one that winds through the world of the warrior. Here we meet a figure whose name has echoed through centuries. Miyamoto Musashi. He was born in the late 16th century, a time when Japan was still emerging from generations of war. The country was moving toward unification, but the shifting alliances of daimyos and the ambitions of warlords still set the stage for conflict. Musashi was said to have fought his first duel at the age of 13. The story tells of a young boy, tall for his age, with a rough manner and a fierce determination. Armed with nothing more than a wooden sword, he defeated his opponent, and from that day forward, his life was shaped by the way of the warrior. Unlike many samurai of his time, Musashi was not bound to a single lord. He became a ronina, masterless samurai wandering from place to place, seeking opponents to test his skill. It was a life of uncertainty, without the security of land or steady income, but it offered freedom. Musashi's duels became the stuff of legend. He was said to have fought more than 60 contests, never losing. In one of his most famous encounters, he arrived late on purpose, carving a wooden sword from an oris's boat, crossed the water to meet his opponent. The delay unsettled the man he was to face, and Musashi used that moment of imbalance to win. But his life was not only about fighting. As he grew older, Musashi turned his attention to the arts, painting, calligraphy, and sculpture. His brushstrokes were as precise and deliberate as his swordplay. He also wrote a work that endures to this day, the Book of Five Rings. In its pages, Musashi spoke of strategy, timing, and the mental state of a warrior. His teachings were not only for those who carried swords, but for anyone who sought to understand conflict, discipline, and the importance of adapting to change. In the later years of his life, Musashi withdrew to a cave, spending his days in quiet contemplation. There, he refined his thoughts, distilling a lifetime of experience into his writing. He died in 1645, his body at rest, his name carried forward as both a swordsman and a thinker. His life, though far removed from the muddy paddies of the peasants, was not without hardship. It was marked by solitude, constant movement, and the unending search for mastery. The path of the warrior, for Musashi, was as much about the mind as the bladed discipline that endured long after the duels were done. From the wandering life of the Ronin, let us turn toward a place that seems fixed and eternal, a fortress of white plaster and stone, rising above the plain like a bird poised for flight. Himeji Castle is often called the White Heron, for the way its sweeping roofs and pale walls resemble the outstretched wings of that graceful bird. It stands today much as it did centuries ago, its presence unchanged, even as the world around it has shifted. Approaching the castle, you would first notice its height. From a distance, it appears delicate, almost ornamental, but as you draw nearer, the massive stone walls rise before you, their surfaces carefully angled so that arrows and stones might glance harmlessly away. The paths leading up to the main keep are not direct. Instead, they wind in deliberate curves, guiding any approaching enemy along narrow lanes where defenders could watch from above. These turns were not mistakes in design, but part of a carefully constructed defense, forcing intruders to slow their pace, exposing them at each corner. The walls are pierced with openings, some round, others shaped like triangles or rectangles. From within, defenders could fire arrows or drop stones on attackers without revealing themselves. Each shape was chosen with purpose, matching the weapon it was meant to serve. Passing through the gates, you would notice that each door is heavy, reinforced with iron bands. Some open inward, others outward, forcing an intruder to hesitate while pushing them. In times of siege, every moment of hesitation mattered, but Himeji Castle was not only a place of war. Inside its courtyards, gardens bloomed in springtime, and wooden corridors echoed with the sound of sandals on polished floors. The interior rooms were bright with sliding paper screens, painted with scenes of pine-covered hills and flowing rivers. Even the walls themselves seemed to carry a sense of calm white plaster, smooth to the touch, made with a mixture that resisted both fire and decay. Hidden within the beauty, there were secrets. Narrow staircases turned sharply, forcing climbers to twist and slow their ascent. Storage rooms for weapons and food were placed strategically, allowing the defenders to outlast an enemy's patience. Some say there were even concealed space where a lord's retainers could hide in times of great danger. When you stand at the top of the main keep, the view stretches far in all directions: fields, rivers, distant hills, and the faint glimmer of the sea. For those who lived within its walls, the castle was a symbol of strength, a place of protection in a world that could turn uncertain overnight. Today, Himeji Castle remains one of the finest examples of Japanese castle architecture, a place where the artistry of design met the realities of defense. Its white walls have seen centuries pass, and in the quiet of its corridors, one can almost hear the footsteps of those who once walked here, their lives bound to the rhythm of the castle's gates and gardens. From the sturdy walls of Himeji Castle, let us step inward past the defensive gates and winding corridors into a world of refinement, ceremony, and quiet authority. The court of a daimyo was a place of contrasts. Here, warriors in lacquered armor stood beside poets and calligraphers. Here, the clink of steel gave way to the soft hiss of a teapot pouring jinto, delicate porcelain cups. A daimyo was a feudal lord, holding vast lands and commanding the loyalty of many samurai. His court was not merely a household, it was a center of governance, a stage where political alliances were built and maintained. Every guest, every conversation, every gift exchanged, all of it carried meaning. Imagine yourself entering the audience chamber. The air smells faintly of cedar and tatami straw. The light filters in through shoji screens, casting soft, shifting patterns on the polished floor. You kneel, head bowed, careful to move with the measured grace expected of Alin, the presence of the Lord. At one end of the hall sits the daimyo, his posture perfectly straight, his robe of fine silk patterned with his family crest. Around him are his senior retainers, men who have served him for years, each with a face that betrays little. Conversations here are polite, but every word is weighed, and every silence carries its own kind of weight. Life in the court followed a rhythm shaped by ritual. There were audiences to hold, petitions to hear, and messages to send to distant lands. There were visits from other lords' envoys, each carrying greetings, news, and often subtle tests of loyalty. Meals were occasions of both nourishment and display. Long, low tables would be set with lacquered trays, each holding small, carefully arranged dishes: grilled river fish, pickled vegetables, bowls of steamed rice scented faintly by the cedar lids that covered them. At feasts, sake would be poured in measured cups, and poetry might be recited between courses. Beyond the formal chambers, there were gardens where stepping stones led past, still ponds and manicured pines. In these quiet spaces, tea ceremonies were held, ritualized gatherings in which each movement, from the folding of a cloth to the whisking of powdered tea, was performed with deliberate care. For those present, it was not simply a drink, but a moment of shared calm, a reflection of harmony and respect. Yet beneath the stillness, there was an undercurrent of vigilance. The daimyo's position depended on the loyalty of his retainers and the stability of his alliances. A misplaced word, a slight misstep in etiquette, could signal disrespect or worse, disloyalty. In this world, grace and caution went hand in hand. Life in the daimyo's court was not the harsh, muddy existence of the peasant's village, nor the restless wandering of a ronin, but it carried its own burdens. To live here was to move within an intricate dance, each step measured, each bow calculated, each smile considered. It was a life of refinement, but also of constant awareness, where survival depended as much on subtle understanding as on the strength of one's sword arm. Imagine you awaking before dawn. The desert is quiet, its darkness still heavy with the memory of night's cold. The stars are fading into a pale blue wash, and the horizon is little more than a faint line, where sand meets the promise of the coming day. You rise from your bedding, often no more than a felt blanket spread inside a low, round Gara traditional yurt. Already, your breath leaves a pale mist in the frigid morning air. The Gobi Desert is cruel in its extremes. In winter, temperatures can plunge well below freezing, and in summer, the midday heat is a searing wolfit, drains the strength from man and beast alike. Your first task is to check the camels. They are your livelihood, your transportation, your source of milk, wool, and sometimes meat. Bactrian camels, with their two distinctive humps, are perfectly adapted to the harshness here, but even they require careful tending. Their thick coats, warm in the winter, must be shed in the summer heat. Their strong legs and broad, padded feet carry them across rocky plains and deep sand alike. Still, without water, even they will weaken, and a sick camel can spell disaster for the entire caravan. You approach the herd, counting them by habit, running your hand along their rough coats. Some may still be hobbled from the night, to keep them from wandering too far in search of grazing. In the distance, the wind stirs a faint line of dust, a reminder of how quickly the weather can shift. Feeding is a challenge in this land. Pasture is sparse, often nothing more than patches of dry grass or thorny shrubs. The camels browse slowly, pulling up coarse plants that no other livestock could stomach. You must know where to lead them, places remembered from seasons past, where water may lie hidden in shallow wells or frozen in winter ice. When the caravan is moving, your days are defined by the slow rhythm of travel. The camels walk in a line, each tethered to the next, their long necks swaying, their footsteps making a soft, almost musical thud in the sand. You ride or walk alongside, your eyes scanning the horizon for landmarks. A distant ridge, a darker patch of earth where water may be found. The dangers are many, though rarely sudden. A sandstorm can roll in without much warning, turning the air into a wall of dust that grinds into your skin and blinds your sight. The heat in summer can be merciless, making your head swim, while in winter, the wind cuts like a blade, freezing your hands even through layers of felt and wool. Nights on the steppe are a test of endurance. After a day of walking under the heavy sun, you tether the camels, set up the gear if the caravan is pausing, and prepare a simple meal, perhaps a pot of salty milk tea, thickened with flour, or boiled dumplings made from whatever meat is available. The fire is small, its smoke rising into a sky crowded with stars. You sleep lightly, for there is always the possibility of trouble, a predator prowling near the herd, a camel falling ill, or the distant shape of riders who may not be friendly. It is a life of vigilance and patience. There are no idle days, no long hours of leisure. Even in moments of rest, your mind is on the herd, on the next water source, on the health of the animals, on the weather that might turn against you without warning. In the Gobi, your survival is bound completely to the camel's survival. Their strength carries you through, but their needs bind you to a daily cyclus, old as the desert itself. It is a life of endurance, and one that offers little room for weakness. Imagine now that the slow, steady rhythm of the camel caravan is no longer just the backdrop to daily survival, but the very path toward distant worlds. The Gobi stretches ahead of you, but beyond its sands lies a thread of travel and trader thought we now call the Silk Road, a network of paths connecting the shores of the Mediterranean to the palaces of China. It is along this thread, in the late 13th century, that a Venetian merchant named Marco Polo set out with his father and his uncle, Maffeo. They were traders by profession, men accustomed to dealing in the fine goods of the East, silks, spices, gemstones, and other luxurious that Europe could not produce but desired deeply. Their journey was not a brief excursion. It was a years-long commitment, a slow unfolding of landscapes and cultures, each more distant than the last. The Gobi Desert was only one chapter in their long trek, but it was a chapter written in hardship. Crossing it meant enduring long stretches without reliable water, navigating in a place where the horizon was a shifting mirage, and relying entirely on the knowledge of local guides. We understood where to find a hidden well, or when to shelter from a dust storm. Marco, still in his teens when he began, had never known such extremes. Venice was a city of canals and commerce, where the air was thick with the smell of the sea, and the streets echoed with merchants' voices. The Gobi offered none of that. Instead, it gave him a landscape so open that the sky seemed to press down against the earth, and the wind carried only the sound of its own passing. The caravan he traveled with moved in measured days. You can imagine him riding, his face half covered to keep the dust from his mouth, watching the camels sway ahead, the leather saddles creaking softly with each step. The heat during the day could be intense, baking the earth until it cracked. At night, the cold returned swiftly, slipping into blankets and making rest uneasy. But the Gobi was more than just an obstacle. It was also a meeting ground. Along the way, Polo's caravan would have encountered others. Mongol herders moving with their flocks, Persian traders bringing glassware and fine cloth, Buddhist monks traveling toward temples in the east. Each exchange of goods was also an exchange of stories, tales of cities ahead, warnings of dangers behind, and sometimes shared meals cooked over small, smoky fires. When Polo and his family finally reached the lands of Kublai Khan, it marked not the end of their journey, but the beginning of a long stay at the Mongol court. Marco's detailed accounts of China, its cities, customs, and innovations, would later astonish European readers, though some doubted whether his tales were true. He described paper money, intricate postal systems, and cities with populations larger than anything in Europe at the time. Yet behind the marvels, there remained the simple truth. Thought, none of it could have been reached without crossing those harsh and empty miles of desert. The Gobi was a test, one that wore away at the body and the mind, but also shaped those who endured it. For Marco Polo, it was a proving ground that lay between Venice and the vast empire of the East, a place where the slow rhythm of the camel caravan set the pace for the rest of his journey. And so, as his path carried him onward toward the heart of the Mongol realm, he left behind the drifting dunes and stony plains, but carried with him the memory of wind, sand, and survival. Now, imagine that you have moved beyond the living desert into a landscape where stone walls rise unexpectedly. The sand, they are not freshly built, but the remains of once proud cities, places where caravans once stopped to trade, where water was stored in deep wells, and where the sound of many language code through crowded markets. The Silk Road was never a single road, but a web of routes, threading through mountains, valleys, and deserts. Along these threads, cities sprang up, waypoints between empires, safe harbors for merchants and pilgrims alike. Some became wealthy, their streets lined with tiled courtyards, warehouses filled with goods, and inns where tired travelers could sleep on woven mats while their animals were fed and watered. In the heart of the Gobi and beyond, there were cities like Karakoto, its name meaning Black City in Mongolian. It stood on the banks of the Aegean River, an oasis settlement that flourished for centuries. Its thick mud brick walls still stand today, in part, their shadows stretching long in the late afternoon sun. But its streets are silent, its gates unmanned. What caused it to be abandoned is still the subject of debate. Some say drought, some say conflict, and others point to shifting trade routes that left it behind. Farther along the routes lay Dunhuang, a city that did not vanish entirely, but transformed over time. It was here, near the western edge of China, that travelers found the Magao cave temples carved into the cliffs, their walls covered in vibrant paintings. These murals told stories from Buddhist texts, showing kings, merchants, animals, and even imagined foreign lands. For the weary traveler, such a place would have seemed a miracle, a refuge of art and color in the harshness of the journey. Then there were places swallowed almost completely by the desert. The city of Lalun, once thriving near the shores of a now vanished lake, is known to us today mostly through archaeological finds, wooden beams worn smooth by time, textiles preserved in the dry air, and the remains of canals that once carried water to its fields. Standing there now, you would see only sand and sky, but beneath your feet lies the memory of human hand shaping earth into home. What is striking about these lost cities is how quickly fortune could fade. A river changing course, a few years of drought, a road becoming unsafe due to raids. Any of these could turn a bustling market into an empty ruin. Merchants, ever practical, would simply find another route, and the desert, with its patient winds, would reclaim what was left. Walking through one of these abandoned places now, you might hear nothing but the crunch of your own footsteps. Walls lean at strange angles, sand drifts through open doorways, and in the distance, the horizon blurs in the heat. It is quiet, but it is not empty. The air seems thick with the presence of Thassa who once traded, prayed, and lived here. These cities were more than stops on a trade route. They were bridges between worlds. They carried not only silk and spices, but also ideas, beliefs, and stories. Even in their silence, they remind us that the Silk Road was not only a line drawn across the map, but a living connection between distant peoples, a connection that sometimes endured, and sometimes, like the cities themselves, faded into the sand. After days, or perhaps weeks, of travel across the open steppe, you approach a place that feels entirely different. The land is still wide, the horizon still far away, but the air is thick with the hum of activity. You are entering the domain of the Khan. From a distance, the court does not resemble a city in the traditional sense. Instead, it is a great encampment, hundreds of yurts arranged in deliberate patterns, some small and modest, others vast, their felt walls covered in silk banners that ripple gently in the wind. In the very heart of this gathering stands the Khan's own ger, larger than any you have seen before, its frame made from carefully curved timbers, its roof crowned with a golden finial that catches the sun. The air smells faintly of burning dung fires, the fuel that keeps the cold at bay, mingled with the rich scent of roasting meat. Horses, the lifeblood of the steppe, stand tethered in orderly lines, their manes combed and glistening. Nearby, camels kneel, their long lashes blinking slowly in the breeze. Inside the konsker, the floor is covered with thick carpets, woven in intricate designs. Low tables are set with polished metal dishes, and cushions invite you to sit cross-legged, as is the custom. The air is warmer here, lit by soft lamplight that glows against the curved walls. Servants move quietly, pouring fermented mare's milk into cups and arranging trays of boiled lamb, dumplings, and sweetened curds. The court is more than a place of residence, is the center of governance, a moving capital that follows the seasons. Here, the Khan hears petitions, meets with emissaries from distant lands, and decides on matters of war and peace. At any given moment, you might overhear a translator repeating words in several languages: Persian, Chinese, Arabic, Mongolian. As envoys present their gifts, one might offer bolts of fine silk, another a trained falcon, another still an ornate sword inlaid with gold. Ceremony is important. The placement of cushions, the order in which guests are seated, the moment when a cup is offered all carry meaning. To sit closer to the Khan is a sign of great honor, but also great responsibility. Even a small misstep in etiquette called be taken as an insult. Between formal audiences, the court hums with quieter activities. Storytellers recite tales of past victories. Musicians pluck the strings of the Maureen core, its sound deep and resonant, like the wind moving across the plains. Scholars debate points of law, scribes record treaties, and craftsmen repair the Khan's weapons and gear. At night, the court becomes softer still. The glow of many fires dots the camp, each surrounded by small knots of people warriors sharpening blades, women mending clothing, children chasing one another through the shadows. Above it all, the sky is impossibly wide, sprinkled with stars that seem close enough to touch. Life here is a balance between splendor and simplicity. The Khan's wealth is clear in the fine fabrics, the precious metals, and the rare delicacies brought from far-off lands. Yet, it is also a life lived in constant motion, always ready to pack up and move where the grass is greenest, or where the Khan's will demands. For a camel tender, this world might seem distant, a place of authority and grandeur beyond reach, and yet, it is the same steppe wind that blows through the Khan's courtyard over the faraway herds. The same sun rises, and the same cold night falls. From the quiet hardship of the deserto, the orchestrated elegance of the Khan'scape, you can see the thread that ties all of it together. Way of life shaped by the land, the animals, and the people's unshakable adaptability. Imagine standing on a dick that never stops moving beneath your feet. The boards are slick with sea spray, the air sharp with salt. The wind is constant, sometimes a gentle breath that smells faintly of distant land, sometimes a cold force that cuts through your clothing gund, drives the cold deep into your bones. Your day does not begin or end in any way that feels normal. There are no weekends, no fixed mornings or evenings. Instead, time is divided into watches, 4-hour shifts, around the clock. You might be roused in the dead of night, your hammock swaying in the dim, lamplit space below decks, and told to climb the ladder to relieve the men on duty. The sea doesn't care about your need for rest. For the first days or weeks at sea, seasickness takes hold. Your stomach rebels against every motion, even when there is nothing left in it. The smell of the ship makes it worse, a mix of tarred rope, wet wood, and the lingering odor of salted meat stored in barrels. There is no escaping it. Every breath carries the scent. Above decks, the work is constant. Sails must be trimmed, rigging inspected, decks scrubbed clean of salt, crust, and dirt. Your hands quickly grow rough and calloused, the skin cracked from the mix of seawater and cold air. Gloves help little. Everything is damp, and the work is too fine for thick coverings. The food is a trial in itself. Ship's biscuit, hard enough to dull a knife, must be soaked in tea or coffee before you can eat it. Salt pork, stored for months, carries a briny, fatty heaviness. On lucky days, there might be a bit of fresh catch from the sea fish hauled in on a spare line, but mostly, you eat what will not spoil, no matter how unappetizing. And then, of course, there is the hunt itself. When a whale is spotted, the quiet monotony of the ship erupts into a controlled urgency. Small boats are lowered into the sea, each man taking his place at the oars. The chase is long, pulling hard through the rolling waves, eyes fixed on the dark shape surfacing ahead. Even from a distance, you can smell it, a faint oily musk that clings to the back of your throat. When the whale is struck, there is no guarantee of safety. The creature can sound, diving deep and dragging the line with it, or thrash the water into chaos. Men are thrown into the sea, boats are capsized, and all the while the main ship lies far away, a pale speck against the water. Returning with the catches only the start of more grueling work. The whale must be processed, stripped, boiled, and its oil stored in casks. The smell of this work is infamous, thick, choking, and inescapable. It seeps into your clothing, your hair, and even your skin. You will carry it for weeks after returning to shore. Nights bring no true rest. The cold works its way through the thin walls of the forecastle, and the constant groaning of timbers makes it hard to drift fully into sleep. The ship moves even when anchored, and the rolling motion seeps into your muscles. It becomes part of you. For the 19th century whaler, this was not a temporary discomfort, but a way of life. A week aboard might feel endless to a newcomer, but for the seasoned crewman, the weeks blurred into months, and the months into years. The ocean was both prison and livelihood, a horizon that promised only more water. If you close your eyes for a moment, you can picture the Essex, a modest, two-masted whale ship, setting out from the quiet harbor of Nantucket in August of 1819. Her destination, the far reaches of the Pacific. On a voyage expected to last 2.5 years, her crew numbered just over 20, a mix of seasoned whalers and younger men seeking pay and adventure. At first, the journey was like many others: routine watches, distant sightings, occasional captures of smaller whales. But the sea, ever patient, was holding something in store for them. More than a year into their voyage, far from any shore, the Essex met a whale unlike the others they had hunted. It was enormous, a sperm whale estimated at over 80 feet in length, a giant even among its kind. Accounts say it moved with unusual deliberation, circling the ship rather than fleeing. Then, with a sudden burst of speed, it rammed the vessel with its massive head. The blow shook the Essex from bow to stern. For a moment, there was confusion, shouts, the rush of feet on the canned. Then the whale struck again. The timbers groaned, splintered, and the hull began to take on water. In the span of minutes, the Essex was doomed. The crew scrambled into the ship's whaleboats, small open vessels meant for short chases, not for long voyages. They had little food, no shelter, and the nearest known land was over 1,000 miles away. The sea had become their only world. Days turned into weeks. The sun bore down without mercy, scorching their skin and lips. Nights brought cold that sank into their bones. Their supplies dwindled. They rationed what they could: a few biscuits, a sip of water, and sometimes nothing at all. Salt water surrounded them, but to drink it would mean madness and death. The men grew weaker, their oars dipping slowly into the endless swells. They aimed for distant islands, but currents and storms pushed them farther off course. Some boats were lost, entirely swallowed by storms or vanishing beyond sight. The survivors drifted on, haunted by hunger. It is said that by the end, only 8 men remained. Elivon rescue finally came, months after the Essex was struck. The story of the Essex spread far beyond Nantucket, whispered in maritime taverns and printed in papers across the Atlantic world. It became a warning, a reminder that even the mightiest ship was at the mercy of the sea, and that sometimes the hunter could become the hunted. In the years that followed, the tale would inspire Herman Melville, who heard it from a survivor while serving on a whaler himself. It would live on as the shadow behind Moby Dick. Though the Essex was no fiction, her bones lay somewhere in the Pacific. Her fate a quiet caution to all who set sail in pursuit of fortune. Imagine a world of unbroken white. The sky is pale and wide, its light diffused through thin, icy air. The sea is not water, but a frozen plain, stretching to the horizon in every direction. It was here, in the labyrinth of the Arctic, that Sir John Franklin vanished. The year was 1845. Britain's Royal Navy, confident in its power and in the progress of exploration, commissioned an expedition to chart and navigate the Northwest Passage, of fabled sea route linking the Atlantic and Pacific through the high Arctic. Franklin, a seasoned officer in his late 50s, was placed in command. 2 ships were chosen, HMS Erebus and HMS Terror. They were sturdy vessels, fitted with steam engines for auxiliary power, and reinforced against the crushing pressure of ice. Their holds were stocked with preserved food, barrels of fresh water, and enough supplies to last 3 years. The men sailed from the Thames in May, full of purpose, with the promise of discovery. But somewhere beyond Baffin Bay, after their last recorded sighting by a whaling ship, the Erebus and Terror vanished. For years, no one knew their fate. Search parties went north, finding only scattered clues, a weathered note in a cairn, mentioning that both ships had been abandoned in April 1848, after being trapped in ice for nearly 2 years. Franklin had died months earlier. The survivors, over 100 men, set out on foot, attempting to reach safety. They never did. Among the searchers were Inuit. Communitishwo had seen strangers in worn naval coats, stumbling south across the ice. Their accounts told of starvation, of men who dropped where they stood, and of boats hauled desperately over snow. Over time, the Arctic returned more of the expedition's remnants: a silver fork, a button from a uniform, a skeleton found still wearing a blue jacket. But the ships themselves remained lost, hidden beneath decades of shifting ice and silt. In the 21st century, modern technology finally brought answers. In 2014, the Erebus was found, resting in the shallow waters of Queen Maud Gulf. 2 years later, the Terror was located, eerily preserved in deeper water, her hull intact, as if she might one day sail again. Even so, many questions remain unanswered. Why did the expedition fail so completely, when it was so well provisioned? What final thoughts crossed Franklin's mind as the ice closed in? And in the quiet of those last days, what did the men dream of as they lay in their tents, the wind hissing over the snow? The Arctic keeps some secrets, even when the bones have been found. The silence here is not empty, it is full of what we do not yet know. Far from the frozen seas, in towns where the harbor never fully sleeps, there were men who grew wealthy from the peril of others. They were the ship owners. Picture a New England port in the mid-19th century perhaps, New Bedford or Nantucket. Along the waterfront, rows of tall brick warehouses stand solid against the salt air. The smell here is different from the open ocean. It is a mingling of tarred rope, freshly sawn timber, and the faint, ever-present trace of whale oil thought seeps from casks, waiting to be loaded or sold. A shipowner's home might be perched on a hill above the harbor, a fine clapboard house painted white, its broad windows catching the morning sun. Inside, the floors gleam with polished mahogany. Heavy drapes filter the light, and paintings of ships, some still at sea, some long lost, hang above the mantels. The work of ownership was quieter than the harpooner's life, but no less bound to the tides. Each voyage was a calculated risk, months or years at sea, with no guarantee of a profitable return. The owner provided the ship, hired the captain, and outfitted the crew. Every cask of oil brought home not only warmth and light for distant cities, but also a share of the profit. On evenings when the weather was fair, owners would stroll along the waterfront, nodding to dock workers, pausing to inspect a new ship under construction. They spoke with captains about ice in the Bering Strait, about rumors of a rich whaling ground off the Azores, or about the rising price of oil in London. At home, in drawing rooms lit by oil lamps, the very product their ships hunted guests would gather after supper. There might be talk of politics, of new railways, of sons being sent to university. A decanter of port would pass from hand to hand, and the fire would burn low, casting shadows on the brass fittings of the room. For the shipowner, wealth brought security, but it also brought a peculiar distance. He might never set foot on the icy deck of a whaling boat, never know the exhaustion of rowing toward a surfacing whale. And yet, his fortunes rose and fell with the weather far away, with the strength of a harpoon throw, with the return or the loss of a single ship. As the night deepened in those coastal towns, the harbor lights would flicker in the breeze. Out at sea, crews would still be working under cold stars. But here, in the calm warmth of the owner's parlor, the only sound was the steady ticking of a clock, marking time until the next ship came home. Imagine yourself standing at the edge of a river in the Sierra Nevada foothills, the air already warm, though the sun has barely climbed above the horizon. Your boots are caked with mud from yesterday, and the smell of damp earth clings to your clothes. You bend over the water, a simple wooden pan in your hands. You scoop up a mixture of gravel and silt, your fingers numbed by the cold current. With slow, careful motions, you swirl the pan, washing away the lighter dirt. The sound of water slipping over the metal rim becomes a kind of rhythm, steady and hypnotic. Hours pass this way. Your shoulders ache from bending, and your back reminds you of every stone you've lifted this week. Sometimes, a glint catches your eye, but it is only mica, a false sparkle that stirs a brief hope before fading. By midday, your hands are raw, your skin is reddened by the sun, and the only gold you have found is a few tiny flakes that barely dust the bottom of your pan. The camp you return to is not much of a home. A few canvas tents sag between rough poles. Some miners have built cabins from timber and mud, but they are dark and smoky inside. The smell is a mix of unwashed clothes, smoldering fires, and the sour temps of overused cooking pots. There is no fresh bread here, no hot bath, no privacy. When it rains, the paths between tents turn into deep, clinging mud. When it is dry, the dust rises in clouds, coating every surface and every breath you take. Meals are plain and repetitive: salt pork, beans, and sometimes stale biscuits. Fresh vegetables are rare, and milk even rarer. Many miners suffer from scurvy, their gums swollen and tender, their strength slowly fading. The nights are not restful. Voices carry through the thin canvas walls, laughter, arguments, sometimes the sounds of a fight. There is no law here except what the camp agrees to enforce, and disputes over claims can turn quickly from shouting to violence. You keep your small belongings close, because theft is as common as hunger, and yet, each morning, you rise and return to the river, because there is always the thought perhaps today will be the day. Perhaps the pan will catch something heavier, something that stays in the bottom one. The water swirls away. Day after day, this hope keeps you moving, even as your boots wear thin, even as your hands crack from the cold water, even as the gold stays hidden beneath another man's patch of earth. Out here, survival is not about sudden wealth. It is about endurance, the steady rhythm of work, the patience to keep going when the pan comes up empty, and the quiet resignation that for many, this is the closest they will come to striking it rich. While many men in the goldfields spent their days panning for small glimmers in a cold stream, there was one man who found a different path to fortune, and it did not involve digging in the dirt at all. Levi Strauss was born in 1829 in the Bavarian town of Buttenheim, a place of narrow streets, modest houses, and the steady rhythm of a small community. He was part of a large family, the youngest of 7 children. When Levi was still a boy, his father died of tuberculosis, leaving his mother to care for the family. Like many in Europe at the time, they looked across the ocean and saw in America a place where new beginnings might be possible. In 1847, at the age of 18, Levi and 2 of his sisters set sail for New York. It was a long voyage across the Atlantic, and one can imagine the slow, creaking motion of the ship, the salty air, and the endless horizon blending with the sky. Once in New York, Levi joined his brothers, who had already begun a dry goods business selling fabrics, clothing, and small household items. It was work far removed from the glittering dream of gold, but it was steady, and it taught Levi the habits of careful trade, knowing your customers, knowing your supplies, and always keeping an eye on opportunity. In 1853, the news of California's gold rush had spread across the country and the world. Thousands were pouring into the West, and San Francisco was swelling into a rough-edged boomtown. Levi saw what many miners could not, that the real wealth might not be in gold, but in selling to those who sought it. So he traveled by ship to San Francisco, bringing with him bolts of fabric, clothing, and sundries to sell to miners and settlers alike. In those days, getting to California was no small matter. The overland route was long and dangerous. Levi chose the sea passage down the Atlantic coast, across the Isthmus of Panama on foot and by mule, then up the Pacific coast by another ship. Weeks passed before he set foot in San Francisco, a city that smelled of wood smoke, salt air, and the dust of unpaved streets. Strauss quickly found his place. Miners, he learned, needed sturdy clothing pants that could withstand the wear of shovels, pans, and days spent kneeling in mud. Wool and cotton wore through quickly, but Strauss had brought something different: heavy-duty canvas. It was coarse and plain, but it was durable. Soon, at the request of a local tailor, Strauss began making trousers from this canvas, adding rivets at stress points so the seams would not tear under strain. These trousers became the foundation of what the world would one day know as blue jeans. Over time, he switched from canvas to a tough cotton fabric from France called serge d'enciemza, phrase that, in English, became simply denim. The deep blue dye, the sturdy weave, and the practical design made the pants a favorite tenet, just among miners, but among ranchers, laborers, and eventually, people far from the goldfields. Levi Strauss's success grew steadily, not in sudden leaps, but in the patient way that a business takes root and flourishes. While many miners left California with empty pockets, Strauss remained, building a company that would last for generations. He lived a modest life despite his wealth, supporting charities and civic projects in San Francisco. By the time of his death in 1902, he had created not just a product, but a singular pair of trousers that carried the story of work, endurance, and the quiet resilience of those who came west, chasing a dream. It is a reminder that sometimes, the richest strike of Alice, not in the ground beneath your feet, but in seeing a need, and meeting it with care and persistence. If you travel through the wide open spaces of the American West today, you may stumble upon places that feel suspended in time. A cluster of weathered buildings, their windows empty, their doors hanging slightly ajar. The wind moves through them with a low sigh, carrying the scent of dry wood and sun-baked earth. These are the ghost towns, the silent remains of what were once bustling communities. During the height of the gold rush and the decades that followed, settlements sprang up almost overnight. It took only the rumor of a rich vein of gold or silver to draw hundreds, sometimes thousands, to a patch of wilderness. Tents would be the first home, simple canvas, stretched over poles. Then came wooden shacks, hurriedly nailed together from rough planks, Before long there would be saloons, general stores, and perhaps even a newspaper office. For a while, these towns could feel alive in a way that was almost feverish. Men worked long days in the mines, returning in the evenings to streets lit by lanterns, to the sounds of pianos drifting out of saloon doors, and the clinking of glasses as miners spent the coins they had earned that day. The air would smell faintly of coal smoke, mixed with the sharp tang of whiskey and the dust kicked up by boots and wagon wheels. But in places like these, the lifeblood was always the mine. When the gold or silver began to run out, or when a richer strike was found elsewhere, the people would leave as quickly as they had come. Sometimes they took their buildings apart for the lumber, but often they left them standing, as though one day they might return. Some towns were abandoned gradually. Families would hold out as long as they could, until the school closed, until the store had nothing left to sell, until there was simply no reason to stay. Others emptied, almost in a single night, a rush of wagons, heading toward the next promising ridge or valley. Time has worked slowly on these places. The sun has bleached the boards to a pale gray. Roofs have sagged and collapsed. Iron tools left behind are coated with rust. In some ghost towns, you can still see handwriting on the wall of a shop, prices for flour, coffee, or tobacco, as though the shopkeeper might step back inside at any moment. Bodie, in California, is one of the most famous. In the late 1870s, it was home to thousands of people. There were hotels, churches, a school, and a bustling main street lined with shops. Now, it is preserved in what is called arrested decay, kept from crumbling completely, but left much as it was found. Walking its streets today, the only sounds are the wind and the occasional creak of an old hinge in the sun. Other towns, like Rhyolite in Nevada, have only fragments left, stone walls without roofs, a bank's facade standing alone against the sky, as if guarding the memory of the town that once stood there. These ghost towns are quiet reminders of how quickly fortune can fade, and how the dreams of one generation can be reduced to empty rooms and drifting sand. And yet, there is a certain peace in them now. The rush and noise are gone, and what remains is stillness, the slow rhythm of weather, the long patience of the land reclaiming what was taken. While the miners toiled in muddy streams and dusty claims, a very different world was taking shape just a few dozen miles away. In the growing city of San Francisco, those who struck it rich or profited from those who tried were building houses unlike anything the region had seen before. Imagine yourself stepping off the busy, plank-covered sidewalks of Montgomery Street, where the air is alive with the calls of merchants and the rattle of wagons, and walking up a quiet hill where the new mansions stand. The houses are large, square, and confident, built of imported timber and finished with ornate details that speak of both wealth and aspiration. Inside, the air is cooler, shaded by heavy curtains. The faint scent of beeswax polish clings to the furniture, and a thick, patterned carpet muffles your footsteps. Gas lamps flicker softly along the walls, casting a golden glow over gilt-framed mirrors that reflect more light into the room. Here, you might find a parlor furnished with deep, upholstered chairs, a marble-topped table spread with silver tea service, and a piano perhaps newly arrived from New York waiting for someone to play. The people who live here are part of San Francisco's new elite. Some made their money supplying miners with tools, others through banking, shipping, or real estate. Their fortunes may have been built on gold, but their lives now revolve around society events, business dealings, and the careful cultivation of status. In the mornings, the household is quietly busy. Servants polish the brass fittings, arrange fresh flowers brought from the market, and set out breakfast in the dining room. You can imagine the gentle clink of china and the soft murmur of conversation as the family discusses the day's plans. Afternoons might be spent receiving visitors in the parlor, or taking a carriage ride along the waterfront to see the new ships in the harbor. The ladies might attend a charity event, wearing silk gowns brought from Paris, while the men discuss shipping rates, land sales, or investments in the next wave of opportunity. Evenings are the most formal. Candlelight dinners begin with oysters on the half-shell, followed by roast meats, vegetables, and rich puddings for dessert. The table is set with fine linen and silver, and the wine has been imported from France or Spain. Between courses, conversation flows easily about politics in Washington, developments in Europe, or the latest gossip from the city's growing theater district. From the windows, you can sometimes catch sight of the city lights spreading across the hills, and beyond them, the black expanse of the bay, Ships' lanterns twinkle on the water, each one a reminder that this city is a gateway to the world. Life here is comfortable, even luxurious, but it is also precarious. Fortunes can rise and fall quickly in San Francisco. A bad investment, a fire sweeping through the city, or the collapse of a mine hundreds of miles away can undo years of prosperity. Still, for those who live in these fine houses in the 1850s, there is a sense of having arrived of, enjoying the rewards that others dream of while the gold rush world churns on outside. And as the day in the mansion draws to a close, the city itself settles into a quieter rhythm. The gas lamps in the streets glow softly in the mist. The clip-clop of the last carriages fades, and somewhere in the distance, a ship's bell rings out across the dark water. Imagine yourself rising early, before the first hints of light touch the eastern horizon. The air is still cool, and the lake is quiet, except for the soft splash of a fisherman's paddle. You have a small woven basket, a few goods to trade, and a long walk ahead, along the causeway into the city center. The marketplace quietly opens at dawn, and already the main square is filling. It is not a small, casual gathering. It is an immense, organized affair, one of the largest in the known world at the time, drawing tens of thousands of people each day. The first thing that strikes you is the crowd. It is dense, pressing, a living river that moves in slow waves between stalls. Here, the concept of personal space is minimally. You feel the brush of strangers' shoulders, the sway of the crowd carrying you forward or back. For someone unused to such closeness, it is disorienting. The noise is constant, but not chaotic. Vendors call out in Nahuatl, their voices rising and falling in rhythmic patterns meant to carry over the din without strain. You hear the crisp sound of beans pouring into clay bowls, the low thump of a maize grinder, the gentle clink of obsidian blades shifting against one another. The smells are layered. You catch the earthy sweetness of ripe tomatoes, the green freshness of herbs laid out in careful bundles, the faint, nutty scent of maize dough. Then a sharper aroma, the pungent bite of chili peppers drying in the sun, mingled with the richer, fatty smell of roasting meat. Navigating the market is not as simple as walking from one place to another. The stalls are arranged by type: one area for produce, another for pottery, another for rare and precious goods. But the boundaries are invisible unless you know them, and the flow of people can easily carry you past the section you need. And then there is the matter of bartering. No coin changes hands here. Value is measured in cacao beans, cotton cloaks, or other agreed-upon goods. You must know the going rate for what you seek, or risk overpaying. A skilled buyer will weigh a handful of cacao beans in their palm, inspect each carefully, and reject any that are broken or discolored. For a newcomer, the negotiation feels endless, a dance of offers and counter-offers, all performed with a polite, measured tone that hides the firmness of the bargain. There are also the watchmen. The market is not left to chance. Officials move quietly through the crowd, ensuring order is kept, checking weights and measures, and watching for thieves. Their presence is not aggressive, but it is constant, and a reminder that this place belongs not only to the people, but to the empire. As the sun climbs higher, the heat begins to press down, and the air thickens with dust stirred up by thousands of feet. The scent of lake water lingers faintly, a reminder that the city itself rests on an island. By midday, the press of the crowd, the endless negotiation, and the demands of finding what you need leave you weary. You would have to be alert, adaptable, and patient to last here. But for someone unaccustomed to the pace, the noise, and the constant human presence, it would be exhausting. And yet, for the Aztec people, this was simply the rhythm of life, a place where goods and gossip flowed in equal measure, and where the heartbeat of the empire could be felt in every measured exchange. From the hum of the marketplace, let us walk further inward, away from the stalls and the chatter of trade. The streets grow wider, the crowds thinner, and the houses more elaborate. Here, the city feels more ordered, more deliberate in its design. This is the part of that Moctezuma II ruler whose story is as complex as the city itself. Moctezuma Xocoyotzin, as he was known, was born into a noble family around the mid-15th century. He was the son of Exeocotl, a previous emperor, and from an early age, he would have been trained not only in martial skills, but in the intricate protocols of Aztec nobility. He learned the proper form of speech, the precise rituals of religion, and the art of diplomacy. When he rose to power in 1502, the Aztec Empire was at its height. Its influence stretched far beyond the Valley of Mexico, its wealth built on tribute from conquered lands. But with that power came complexity, alliances to maintain, rebellions to suppress, and an ever-present need to reinforce the authority of the throne. Moctezuma was not a casual or informal ruler. Those who met him followed strict ceremony. Even high-ranking nobles approached with lowered eyes, removing their sandals before stepping into his presence. Messages were spoken indirectly, passed through intermediaries, so that the emperor's dignity remained untouched by the ordinary rhythm of speech. For some, this made him seem distant. For others, it was the very essence of what it meant to rule. He was deeply religious, and under his leadership, the empire expanded the scale of its ceremonial life. The great temples, already towering above the city, were maintained and adorned with ever more elaborate offerings. Priests held sway in matters both spiritual and political, advising on when to go to war, when to plant crops, and when to seek favor from the gods through ritual. But Moctezuma's reign was not without strain. Some of his military campaigns faced resistance. Not all tribute was paid willingly. Beyond the empire's borders, there were peoples who watched the growing Aztec power with unease. And within it, there were always tensions beneath the surface. It was in this delicate balance that a new and unexpected presence appeared: strangers from across the sea. When the Spanish arrived in 1519, their weapons, their animals, and their appearance were unlike anything the Aztecs had seen. Moctezuma, cautious and deliberate, chose not to confront them outright. Instead, he sought to meet them with ceremony, with gifts, and with careful words. Accounts differ. Some say he believed these newcomers might be linked to ancient prophecies, others that he saw them simply as another political challenge. What is certain is that he invited them into the city. It was a decision that would shape the course of history. The meeting between Moctezuma and was formal, rich with the gestures and offerings that marked Aztec diplomacy. But the balance of power was shifting. Soon after their arrival, the Spanish seized control of the palace where Moctezuma lived. He remained emperor in name, but his freedom was bound by their presence. The final days of his life are still debated. Some sources suggest he was killed by the Spanish, others that his own people, seeing him as too accommodating to the foreigners, turned against him. Whatever the truth, his reign ended in turmoil, and the empire he once ruled would soon face its own collapse. Today, Moctezuma's legacy is complex, a figure both respected and criticized, a ruler of immense ceremony and deep piety, caught in the turning of the world. His story, like the city he governed, is both majestic and fragile, woven through with the threads of power, faith, and fate. From the palace complex, let us walk along one of the great causeways until we reach the beating heart of the city, the Templo Mayor, or Great Temple. It rises in stepped layers, its twin staircases leading upward to two shrines, dedicated to two of the most important deities in Aztec belief: Huitzilopochtli, god of the sun and war, and Tlaloc, god of rain and fertility. At its base, the square plaza stretches wide, a space where thousands could gather. Here, the sounds of daily life mix with the echoes of ceremony chants, conch shell trumpets, and the rhythmic beat of drums. At the center of this complex lay objects that have puzzled archaeologists for generations: the great sacrificial stones. Massive and smooth, these circular platforms were carved from single pieces of volcanic rock, their surfaces worn by years of ritual use. They are heavy, so heavy that the effort to move them into place must have required both ingenuity and sheer human force. Accounts from the early colonial period describe how these stones were used in religious ceremonies, but over time, details became clouded by layers of interpretation, bias, and myth. Some saw them purely as instruments of violence, others as deeply symbolic objects, a physical stage for the meeting between humanity and the divine. When archaeologists uncovered one of these stones in the ruins of the Templo Mayor in the late 20th century, its surface revealed faint carvings, designs of serpents, solar discs, and flowing lines. They suggested that the stone was not merely functional, but part of a wider system of meaning, connecting the cosmos, the gods, and the city itself. For the Aztecs, ritual sacrifice was intertwined with their understanding of the universe. The sun, they believed, needed constant nourishment to rise each day, and the rains required offerings to keep the crops growing. In their worldview, these acts were a duty, a necessary exchange to preserve life as they knew it. Standing in the shadow of the great temple, You might imagine the scene centuries ago, the plaza filled with spectators, priests in elaborate headdresses, and the scent of burning copal drifting into the air. The sacrificial stones at the temple's summit were not hidden away. They stood in the open, symbols of the city's religious devotion. Even now, as they rest in museum displays or within the protected ruins of the temple, these stones hold a quiet weight. They are reminders of a belief system that saw the human world as inseparable from the cosmic order, a world in which the gods were close, but their favor had to be carefully maintained. The mystery, perhaps, is not only in their purpose, but in the way they continue to draw us in. They invite questions about how people of the past understood their place in the universe, about the lengths to which they would go to keep that balance, and so the stones remain silent, enduring, bearing the marks of centuries, and holding in their stillness echoes of a world long gone. From the sacred precinct of the Templo Mayor, let us follow the broad ceremonial Avenuetto, another heart of the Emperor's palace, known in historical accounts as the residence of the Huaytlatoani, or Great Speaker. This sprawling complex was not merely a home, it was an administrative center, a court, a reception hall for ambassadors, and a carefully curated symbol of power. Approaching its walls, you would have seen the shimmering patterns of stucco and stone, decorated with painted designs in deep reds, blues, and yellows. Tall wooden gates marked the entrances, guarded by attendants in richly woven cloaks. Beyond them, wide courtyards opened into covered walkways, each leading to rooms with different functions: audience halls, storerooms for tribute goods, quarters for the emperor's extended family, and even spaces for animals from distant lands, gifts from allies and subject states. Imagine stepping into the main reception hall. The floor beneath your feet is smooth and cool, laid with stone polished by years of use. Light filters in from high openings, casting warm rectangles on the floor. The air smells faintly of burning copal, and somewhere in the distance, a quiet fountain splashes gently into a carved basin. The emperor's court operated with careful etiquette. When meeting Moctezuma to himself, visitors were expected to bow deeply, avoiding direct eye contact. They would be greeted not with a handshake, but with formal words, offered in the precise and poetic Nahuatl style reserved for nobility. Servants would bring food and drink in ceramic vessels, perhaps maize tamales wrapped in leaves, or cacao served warm and bitter, sometimes spiced with chili. Meals in the palace were a display of abundance and variety. Historical records speak of hundreds of dishes prepared each day, from turkey stews to fresh fish brought from the lakes, to rare delicacies from far-flung corners of the empire. Featherwork screens and painted panels provided both decoration and privacy, depicting scenes of myth, conquest, and celestial order. The gardens of the palace were equally remarkable, designed not only for beauty, but to display the empire's reach. Terraces held flowering plants from distant provinces, their scents mingling in the warm air. Stone channels carried water to ornamental pools, where brightly colored fish swam lazily beneath the shade of trees. Birds with dazzling plumage flitted from branch to branch, some trained to mimic human speech. Within the palace walls, politics and diplomacy unfolded quietly, often behind closed doors. Envoys from other cities would arrive bearing gifts, bundles of fine cotton cloth, precious stones, jars of honey, or rare feathers from tropical birds. In return, they would leave with agreements sealed, alliances strengthened, or, at times, polite but firm refusals. While life in the marketplace was noisy and chaotic, life in the emperor's palace was ordered, measured, and steeped in symbolism. Every gesture, every garment, every word spoken in its whole swathes, part of a larger performance of power and tradition. And yet, even here, beyond the markets, beyond the sacred temple, the palace was not untouched by the currents of history. Within a few short years of Moctezuma's reign, the Spanish would arrive, and the rhythms of life in these halls would be disrupted forever. For now, though, you can imagine the palace at its height, its cool corridors, its fragrant gardens, its quiet yet deliberate pace, a place where the heart of an empire beat softly, but with unshakable authority.